Archaic religions in the ancient world were based on sacrifice and exclusion. The French anthropologist Rene Girard has convincingly made this case primarily in two books, Violence and the Sacred and Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. Fascinating books, I encourage you to read them. What Girard postulates primarily is that in these ancient cultures, you have individuals who are having conflicts with one another. And the communities are always on the verge of explosion, of everyone against everyone. And what ends up happening for the communities to survive is that they end up uniting over and against an individual or a minority group. And they project all of their problems upon this individual. Now, the individual is probably an outsider, somebody who may walk with a limp or looks a little different, talks a little different. These are the characteristics of the scapegoat. What ends up happening is religion forms around this, because where there once was conflict, the exclusion of this individual, of having a common enemy and uniting against the scapegoat, causes some temporary peace. And out of this temporary peace forms the ritual of sacrifice and forms this idea of transcendent truth, that the gods demand this sacrifice for peace to happen. And so you have priests who perform these rituals, who hold this truth of violence and exclusion. And whenever conflicts arise, this inevitably ends up happening, a scapegoat. Now, I bring all of this up because I think it's very important for the way that we understand the way that our modern world works. This is archaic sacrifice, but humans have not moved beyond this practice of exclusion. We in the modern world have this new project called Secularism, where we think that we have gotten rid of the shackles of religion. But really what ends up happening is we are more shackled to these religious practices than ever. And I want to point this out with somebody I have great respect for, a very interesting person in the secular world. His name is Sam Harris.
My name is Sam Harris. I'm a writer and a neuroscientist, and also one of the founders of the Reason Project, which is a nonprofit purpose towards spreading secularism and scientific thinking in society.
Sam Harris is a fascinating person because he wants to promote reason and secularism over and against religion. And the way that he does that, fascinatingly enough, is the way of archaic religions, the practice of exclusion, the practice of sacrifice. Harris wants to argue that there is this reason, capital R, and it's as if there's this transcendent reason that everybody should be able to grasp a hold of. But interestingly enough, it looks a lot like Sam Harris. So if you claim to be reasoning, but you're not reasoning in the way that Sam Harris reasons, Harris will say, well, you're not using reason, and thus you should be excluded. So in this way, Sam Harris is one of our great priests of secular religion. That term, secular religion, may seem strange to you, but the reason that we can put it together is because secularism often uses the methods of archaic religion, and those methods are based on sacrifice and exclusion. So Sam Harris is one of our great secularist priests who are leading us to sacrifice those who look a little different, who reason a little different than we do. And as a good archaic priest does, leads us to say, it's all their fault. If only we could get rid of them, the world would be a much better place. What I like about Harris is that there are violent practices that we should critique. And oftentimes religion is implicated in those violent practices. But Harris can't get away from the violence of exclusion and sacrificing those who don't think or reason like he does. Now, the problem with sacrificing the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is that those religions both reveal this archaic sacrifice, but also challenge it. So in the Old Testament, you have these passages in Leviticus where it says, love your neighbor as yourself. And you also get this sense that your neighbor also includes the stranger in your midst. So don't sacrifice the strangers. In the New Testament, you've got passages where Jesus says, love your enemy. Love those who persecute you. Now, Harris wants to set up Christianity and Islam against each other and say that they are incompatible. In this way, you can say that secularism has a common enemy in these two religions that will never get along anyway.
And what's worse is these are mutually incompatible certainties. I mean, there's no way to reconcile Islam with Christianity. This difference of opinion admits of compromise about as much as a coin toss does, because, to take only one example, if you're a Christian of any serious conviction, you have to believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ. Well, it says in two places in the Quran that if you believe that Christ was divine, you will go to hell.
But in the Quran, you have these verses that also say, listen, you have differences with people of other religions. Race to do good deeds. And in the end, God will tell you about your differences. So Harris wants to highlight those violent verses in sacred scripture and ignore the verses that lead us to grace and compassion and doing good for one another. And I get the impulse to do that. I understand it. But I think that what these Abrahamic religions are doing, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are saying, look, there are these two ways to live. One that is towards sacrifice and exclusion, and one that is towards grace, mercy, and compassion. You pick. And the secular world has that option to pick. But it's these Abrahamic religions that are putting that choice right in front of us. So those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks.